The morning air at the port of Bayonne carried the scent of salt and promise. Evelyn Carter stood near the boarding area, her 2 suitcases stacked neatly beside her feet, the brim of her straw sun hat shading a face alive with quiet anticipation. At 62, she had worked her entire life, and this Caribbean cruise was meant to be her first real vacation, a celebration with her son Daniel, his wife Victoria, and their 2 children, Noah and Sophie. She had bought 3 new dresses just for the formal dinners, packed sunscreen and a beach hat, and even treated herself to a pair of oversized sunglasses. She had imagined laughter on the deck, games with the kids, warm nights under the stars. For weeks, that image had carried her through her quiet evenings alone in her Princeton apartment. Daniel was late, as usual. Ever since marrying Victoria, punctuality had become more of a suggestion than a rule. Evelyn didn't mind. She sat down on a bench overlooking the pier and watched other families arrive, chattering excitedly as they wheeled their luggage toward the terminal. She smiled, imagining herself among them in just a few minutes. But then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "Mom, change of plans. You're not coming. We're going just as a family." For a few seconds, Evelyn stared blankly at the screen, convinced she had misread it. She read the message again, then again, and again. The words didn't change. Her chest tightened, and her hands began to tremble. Slowly, almost mechanically, she lifted her head, and there they were. On the upper deck of the ship, Daniel stood checking his phone. Victoria was adjusting her blonde hair in the wind, pointing out something to the kids. Noah was jumping excitedly near the railing, while Sophie clutched a stuffed rabbit in her arms. None of them looked toward her. Maybe they hadn't seen her. Maybe they had and chose not to, just as a family. The phrase ricocheted through Evelyn's mind like a cruel echo. What was she then? A stranger? A burden? Not the woman who had raised Daniel on her own after his father walked out. Not the woman who had worked 2 jobs to pay for his education. Not the woman who had stayed up countless nights comforting him when he lost soccer games or failed tests. Not the woman who had sacrificed her own dreams to give him his. Her throat burned as she turned away from the pier, her steps heavy, deliberate. She didn't look back at the ship or the sea. 40 minutes later, a taxi dropped her off in front of her apartment building. The home that had once felt warm and welcoming now seemed hollow, like a museum of a life that had suddenly lost its meaning. She dropped her handbag on the couch and walked straight to the small office where she kept her important documents. In the second drawer, beneath a folder of insurance papers and tax records, was a blue folder marked Lawrenceville property. Inside was the deed to Daniel and Victoria's house, the house she had purchased for them 5 years ago as a wedding gift. The same house where she was no longer welcome for Sunday dinners because Victoria needed space to build her own family environment. Evelyn flipped through the pages. The last mortgage payment had been made just 2 months earlier by her, and the deed still bore one name, Evelyn Carter. Daniel had always brushed it off. "It's just paperwork, Mom. We'll handle the transfer later." She had believed him. She had believed that gratitude was enough, that love was enough. Now she understood. It hadn't been forgetfulness. It had been convenience. Her hand steadied as she wiped away tears she hadn't noticed falling. Beneath the grief, something colder and sharper began to stir. Clarity. Patricia's endless talk of healthy boundaries. Daniel's growing distance. The subtle ways she had been pushed aside, fewer invitations, more excuses. Gifts that felt impersonal and obligatory. It wasn't a single act. It was a pattern. And the cruise was simply the final confirmation. Evelyn inhaled deeply and reached for her phone. She scrolled to a familiar number and pressed call. "Good morning, Miss Carter," came the warm voice on the other end. "Hello, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice calmer than she expected. "Do you remember the house I bought for my son?" "Yes, of course. I need to know what my legal options are." As she listened to the attorney explain what she already suspected, that the property was legally hers and hers alone. The tremor in her hands faded. The anger remained, humming beneath her skin. But above it was something steadier, a resolve she hadn't felt in years. The cruise was gone, the dream shattered, but something else was taking shape. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn Carter wasn't thinking about Daniel or Victoria or the grandchildren. She was thinking about herself. And that, she realized, was the beginning of something far more powerful than a vacation. The days that followed passed in a strange, suspended silence. The Carter family was somewhere in the Caribbean now, posting smiling photos from the ship's deck to social media. Evelyn saw one of them by accident. Victoria's profile was public, a picture of Daniel and the kids by the pool, all of them beaming under the tropical sun. The caption read, "Family time. Nothing more important." Evelyn stared at the screen until the words blurred, then closed the app and set the phone face down. On the third morning after the message at the port, she picked it up again, but this time to make a call. "Teresa, it's me," she said when the familiar voice answered. "Evelyn, are you all right? I thought you were leaving for your cruise." "I didn't go," Evelyn replied quietly. "Plans changed. Listen, I need your help. I want to sell the Lawrenceville house." There was a long pause on the line. "Are you sure?" Teresa asked carefully. "That's a big decision. I've never been more sure of anything," Evelyn said. "It's still in my name. I checked. Can you start the process?" "Of course. We'll need to get inside to take photos and do a walkthrough." "I have a key," Evelyn said, her voice flat. That afternoon, Evelyn drove the 40 minutes from Princeton to Lawrenceville. The house looked just as it always had from the outside. A tidy 2-story colonial with white shutters and a manicured lawn she had paid to landscape. But as she stepped inside, the atmosphere felt colder than she remembered. Her key turned smoothly in the lock. Daniel hadn't changed it, probably assuming she'd never come by unannounced. The living room was spotless, staged almost like a model home. On the mantel were framed photos. Daniel with the kids at Disney World, Victoria with her sister in Napa, even a family Christmas card from the year before. Evelyn's face wasn't in any of them. In the kitchen, the refrigerator door that had once displayed her grandchildren's crayon drawings and a photo of her and Noah baking cookies together now held only a grocery list and a school calendar. Even the small ceramic bowl she had made in a pottery class, the one Victoria used to keep keys in, was gone from the entryway table. It was as if she had been erased. Her chest tightened, but she kept walking methodical and calm. Upstairs, Daniel's office was a mess of papers, receipts, and unopened mail. She wasn't looking for anything in particular until she opened the second drawer of his desk. There it was, a document titled Transfer of Property Ownership, neatly clipped together and signed but ready. Daniel's name, Victoria's name, and a blank space where Evelyn's signature was meant to go. The date field was left empty, but the rest was filled out. She traced her fingers over the lines, reading every word. They had planned to take the house the moment the mortgage was fully paid by her and transfer it into their names. The sting of betrayal burned hot behind her eyes, but it didn't undo her resolve. If anything, it clarified it. They weren't just pushing her away. They were preparing to cut her out entirely. By the time Teresa arrived 2 days later with her camera and clipboard, Evelyn had already boxed up a few personal items that still remained. A set of antique teacups in the kitchen cabinet, a framed photo of Daniel as a boy from the hallway. Teresa walked through the house, slowly, taking notes and measurements. "I already have someone in mind," she said when they were done. "A couple of doctors relocating from Chicago. They're looking for a place like this and want to close fast. They'll pay cash." Evelyn nodded. "Then let's move forward." Teresa looked at her for a long moment. "Are you sure, Evelyn? Once we list it, there's no going back." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "I know, and I want this. I need this." They agreed to start paperwork the next morning. Teresa would handle the listing discreetly, and because it was a cash offer, closing could happen in as little as a week. as Evelyn locked the door behind them and walked down the front steps. She turned for one last look at the house she had once imagined would always be part of her family's story. But now she understood something new. It was part of her story, and the next chapter was about to begin. The night before the sale closed was still and quiet, the kind of silence that made every breath feel heavier. Evelyn stood in the center of the empty living room, her footsteps echoing softly against the hardwood floor. The walls were bare now, the photographs and paintings gone, the shelves cleared. Movers had come earlier that day to pack the last of Daniel and Victoria's belongings and transport them to a storage facility she had paid for. 3 months, prepaid in full. She had written the address and access code on a slip of paper she left on the kitchen counter. They would have plenty of time to retrieve their things. On the dining table, one of the few pieces of furniture still left, she placed a single envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed simply, Daniel and Victoria. She read it one last time before sealing it. This house has always been in my name. I bought it as a gift, but I never transferred ownership. That means the decision about what happens to it has always been mine. It's been sold. The new owners will move in soon. Your belongings are safe and stored for 3 months at the address provided. I hope one day you understand that this isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming the part of myself I lost trying to be everything for everyone else. Mom. Her handwriting trembled slightly near the end, but she felt no doubt about the words. For years, she had written checks, cooked meals, babysat grandchildren, and rearranged her life around the rhythms of Daniel's family. It wasn't that she regretted any of it. She loved them. But somewhere along the way, Evelyn Carter had ceased to exist as anything other than Mom and Grandma. Tonight, in this hollow shell of a house, she could feel that version of herself slipping away. She took a slow step across the empty floor, then another. The space felt foreign now, stripped of its history, and yet it was liberating. On a whim, Evelyn stretched her arms and began to sway gently, then spin, clumsy and breathless, laughing quietly at herself. It wasn't really dancing. It was more like shedding a skin she had worn too long. Each turn, each step, felt like peeling away another layer of guilt, resentment, and invisible expectation. For the first time in years, she wasn't someone's support system, someone's solution, someone's fallback plan. She was simply Evelyn, and that was enough. When dawn crept over Lawrenceville, Evelyn was already awake, dressed neatly and waiting by the front door. Teresa arrived with the buyers, the young doctors from Chicago, their eyes bright with excitement as they toured their new home. Evelyn greeted them warmly, signed the final documents at the kitchen counter, and handed over the keys. "Congratulations," she said with a small smile. "I hope this house brings you joy." They thanked her, not knowing the depth of what that gesture meant. As she stepped out into the crisp morning air, Evelyn glanced back once. The house was no longer hers, and strangely, that thought didn't hurt. It felt like a door closing gently, and another opening somewhere ahead. That evening, back in her Princeton apartment, she opened her laptop and navigated to an airline website. The cursor hovered over the destination field for a long moment before she typed it. Paris, France. A city she had dreamed of visiting since she was 20, back when she thought she might be an art student traveling the world. Life had gotten in the way. Work, bills, Daniel. But now, with the click of a button, she booked a one-way ticket departing in 2 weeks. As the confirmation email landed in her inbox, Evelyn leaned back in her chair and exhaled. For decades, her life had been built around other people's needs. Tonight, for the first time, she had chosen something purely for herself, and it felt like the beginning of everything. 3 days before the cruise was scheduled to return, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a message. "Daniel, we miss you, Mom. The kids keep asking when they'll see you. Let's plan something when we get back." An hour later, a delivery arrived, a glossy gift box tied with a silk ribbon. Inside was a bottle of perfume from Victoria, along with a short note, "Thinking of you. Hope we can talk soon." Evelyn read, both messages without replying. There was nothing to say, not now. The silence was deliberate, a boundary drawn not out of spite but necessity. For too long, her love had been assumed, her presence guaranteed, her forgiveness automatic. She was done handing out absolution before anyone had truly reckoned with what they had done. On the morning the ship returned to New Jersey, Evelyn drove to the port of Bayonne. She parked a few blocks away and walked to the waterfront, standing beneath the shade of an elm tree overlooking the terminal. From a distance, she spotted them easily, Daniel in a navy polo shirt, Victoria fussing with Sophie's backpack, Noah tugging impatiently at his father's hand. They looked like a picture of a happy family, the kind she had once been proud to be part of. She watched them laugh about something as they rolled their luggage toward the parking lot. They didn't see her. Evelyn turned and walked back to her car, never once glancing over her shoulder. The next morning, at precisely 8:15 a.m., there was a knock on her door. She knew who it was before she even looked through the peephole. Mom. Daniel's voice cracked through the wood. Are you home? We need to talk. She hesitated, then opened the door. He stood there, pale and frantic, holding a stack of mail in one hand and a set of keys in the other. Why is there a for sale sign in front of the house? He demanded. And why is the door code not working? Because the house has been sold, Evelyn replied calmly. Daniel blinked, as if the words were in another language. What? No, that's not possible. That house is mine, Evelyn finished for him. It's been mine from the day I signed the papers. I never transferred ownership. Daniel, you know that. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, struggling to form words. But we live there. The kids. And now you'll find somewhere else, she said, her tone even but unyielding. I arranged storage for your belongings for 3 months. That's more than fair. Daniel's voice rose, a mix of anger and disbelief. You blindsided us. You didn't even talk to me first. Evelyn felt something inside her harden. You didn't talk to me before you left me standing at the port either. You didn't ask if I was okay when you decided I wasn't part of your family. You made that choice without me. I'm simply following the same principle. Daniel stepped back, his shoulders slumping as the weight of her words sank in. It was Victoria's idea, he muttered weakly. She thought it would be better. I don't care whose idea it was, Evelyn interrupted. What matters is that you went along with it, and that told me everything I needed to know. The silence that followed stretched long and heavy. Daniel's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Evelyn thought he might shout, but he didn't. Instead, he stared at the floor. So what happens now? I'm going to Paris, Evelyn said, her voice softening just slightly. I don't know when I'll be back. Maybe in a few weeks. Maybe never. Daniel looked up sharply. Never. I need space, Daniel, she said. Space to remember who I am outside of being your mother. I've spent my whole life building things for other people. Now I'm going to build something for myself. He swallowed hard. What about us? That's up to you, Evelyn replied. What happens from here depends on whether you're willing to see me as more than the person who cleans up after your choices. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel nodded faintly, turned, and walked down the hallway. Evelyn closed the door gently behind him and leaned against it, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The house was sold. The decision was made. The ticket to Paris was waiting in her inbox. For the first time in decades, her life was entirely her own, and though the path ahead was uncertain, it finally felt like it belonged to her. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of Evelyn's decision spread quickly through her small social circle in Princeton. Friends she'd known for decades, women who had shared potlucks and book clubs, and whispered conversations over coffee, called to check on her, but their tone carried judgment beneath the concern. I understand you were hurt, one of them said gently over lunch, but selling the house? That's extreme, Evelyn. Maybe, Evelyn replied evenly, stirring her tea. But they have 3 months to find a new place. I could have given them 30 days. I chose compassion, even when they didn't. Another friend shook her head. Still, it's a lot. They're your family. Evelyn smiled faintly. Family doesn't mean I owe them everything. Family doesn't mean I accept being erased. The conversations ended there. Some friends grew distant, unsure of how to navigate this new version of Evelyn, a woman who no longer softened her edges to keep the peace. She didn't mind. The silence felt cleaner than their disapproval. One afternoon, a delivery arrived, a bouquet of pale pink roses and a small envelope tucked among the stems. The note inside was brief. I'm sorry for how things happened. I hope we can talk. Victoria. Evelyn placed the flowers in a vase and set them on the windowsill. She typed a short reply to Victoria's text message that followed a few hours later. Thank you. No more. No less. A few days later, there was a soft knock at her door. When she opened it, Sophie stood there, her backpack slung over one shoulder and a drawing clutched in her hand. Evelyn's heart softened instantly. Grandma, Sophie said, holding up the paper proudly. I drew our family on the cruise. I put you in here too. Tears stung Evelyn's eyes as she knelt to hug her granddaughter. It's beautiful, sweetheart, she whispered. Sophie fished another envelope from her bag. Mom asked me to give you this. It's for a family dinner. Everyone wants to see you. Evelyn read the invitation in silence. A part of her longed to accept, to hold Noah again, to see Sophie smile at the dinner table. But she knew what that dinner would really be. An attempt to pretend nothing had happened. A chance for them to reset the narrative without ever acknowledging the betrayal. She folded the invitation and handed it back. Tell your mom thank you, but I can't come. Not like this. Sophie frowned. Why not? Because I'll see you and Noah anytime you want, Evelyn said gently. But I'm not ready to see your mom and dad. The next afternoon, Victoria herself arrived unannounced. She stood on Evelyn's porch, her arms folded tight, her face drawn with tension. Why are you punishing the kids? She demanded as soon as Evelyn opened the door. They miss you. We're trying to rebuild our family. But these conditions of yours, they're not healthy. Evelyn met her gaze steadily. Healthy boundaries, she said. That's what you called it when you told Daniel I wasn't welcome on your family vacation. That's what you called it when you started excluding me from birthdays and dinners. Remember? Victoria's cheeks flushed. That was different. No, Evelyn said, her voice calm but cutting. It's the same. You taught me that boundaries mean deciding who gets access to your time and energy. I'm doing exactly that now. I will always love my grandchildren, but I will no longer be the woman you summon when it's convenient, then dismiss when it's not. Victoria shifted uneasily, her eyes dropping to the ground. We didn't mean to hurt you. And yet you did, Evelyn replied. Actions have consequences. You drew a line. I'm just choosing to stand on the other side of it for a while. Victoria left without another word, and Evelyn closed the door behind her, exhaling deeply. It hurt, of course it did, but for the first time in years, her hurt wasn't followed by self-blame. It was followed by peace. This, she realized, was what boundaries looked like. Not walls, not punishment, just the quiet decision to protect her own dignity, even if no one else understood it. The morning of her departure arrived sooner than she expected. Wrapped in the cool hush of early spring, Evelyn had spent the previous week deliberately, quietly, building memories with the only people she still felt unconditionally connected to. She took Noah and Sophie to the park they loved near Carnegie Lake, where they fed ducks and chased bubbles across the grass. They spent an afternoon at the small science museum in Trenton, where Sophie insisted Evelyn ride the planetarium simulator twice. They baked cookies in her apartment kitchen, their laughter echoing down the hallway. Not once did Evelyn mention the house, the cruise, or the strained conversations with their parents. She wanted the children to remember her not as a figure at the center of family conflict, but as the grandmother who told stories, who wiped ice cream from their cheeks, who loved them without condition. On the last evening, as the sky blushed into twilight, Daniel came to pick them up. He lingered in the doorway after the kids ran ahead to the car, shifting his weight awkwardly from one foot to the other. "When will you be back?" he asked finally. Evelyn looked at him, searching his face for something. Remorse, understanding, anything that felt real. "Maybe never," she said simply. Daniel's brow furrowed. "Never. I don't know, Daniel. I just know I need time. Time away from all of this, from the expectations and the disappointments. I've spent decades putting everyone else first. Now, I want to find out who I am when I stop doing that." He opened his mouth to argue, but the words seemed to dissolve before they formed. Instead, he nodded, looking smaller than she'd seen him in years. "The kids will miss you." "I'll miss them too," she said softly. When the door closed behind him, Evelyn felt an ache she hadn't expected. Not regret, exactly, but the weight of finality. The life she had built around Daniel and his family was ending, and there was no map for what came next. The night before her flight, a final message lit up her phone. "Daniel, we love you, Mom." She stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard. A dozen replies flickered through her mind. From "I love you too" to "this isn't goodbye." But none of them felt right. Words were easy. Change was not. And until she saw change, silence would speak louder than any response. Evelyn locked the phone and slipped it into her purse. The next morning, she stood at the gate of Newark Liberty International Airport, passport in hand, her carry-on neatly packed with the essentials. A notebook, a sketchpad, and a guidebook to Paris she had bought when she was 22 and never used. Boarding began, and as she stepped onto the plane, she felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration bubbling in her chest. Hours later, high above the Atlantic, a flight attendant offered her a glass of champagne. Evelyn accepted, watching the bubbles rise and burst against the rim. She lifted the glass to her lips and closed her eyes. This wasn't a vacation. It wasn't an escape. It was a reclamation of her time, her choices, her life. Somewhere far below, New Jersey was shrinking into the distance. Ahead lay Paris, and with it, the possibility of becoming someone she hadn't been in a very long time. Herself. The spring air in Paris felt different, lighter somehow, touched with a softness Evelyn hadn't known she needed. Kathleen was waiting for her at Charles de Gaulle Airport, waving wildly from behind the barrier. They hadn't seen each other in nearly 5 years, but when they embraced, it felt as if no time had passed at all. "You're here," Kathleen whispered, pulling back to look at her. "You really did it." "I really did," Evelyn replied, and for the first time in months, she smiled without forcing it. Kathleen's apartment was a cozy flat in the 6th arrondissement, tucked between a boulangerie and a small art supply store. The windows opened onto a view of slate rooftops and the distant spire of St. Sulpice. It was nothing like the sprawling houses of New Jersey suburbs, and Evelyn loved it instantly. The first few days passed in a blur of discovery. Evelyn and Kathleen wandered along the Seine, browsed bookstalls and flower markets, and shared long lunches at cafes where no one seemed to be in a hurry. They lingered in art museums until closing time, and Kathleen convinced her to sign up for a painting class at a small atelier near Montparnasse. "It's just for beginners," Kathleen promised. "You'll love it." Evelyn was hesitant at first. It had been decades since she'd held a brush. But on the first day, standing before a blank canvas with the smell of oil paint in the air, she felt something loosen inside her. She painted clumsy landscapes and crooked rooftops, but she didn't care. It wasn't about talent, it was about joy. For the first time in her adult life, her days were entirely her own. No school pickups, no rushed dinners, no endless obligations. She woke up when she wanted, walked until her legs ached, and filled notebooks with sketches of fountains, bridges, and the faces of strangers. It felt like reclaiming a part of herself she'd abandoned long ago. But reality, as always, found a way to intrude. One afternoon, Kathleen came home with a letter from Evelyn's attorney. "Daniel's trying to file something," she said carefully, handing it over. Evelyn read the document. It was a notice of intent, Daniel's attorney questioning the validity of the sale and suggesting potential legal action to reclaim the property. Evelyn felt a flicker of anger, but her lawyer's response was swift and clear. Daniel had no legal claim. The deed was solely in Evelyn's name, and there was no written agreement promising a transfer. The sale was final. That night, Evelyn sat by the window with a glass of wine and called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. "I know about the document," she said, "and I know about the draft transfer you left in your desk." Silence stretched on the other end. "Were you ever going to ask me?" Evelyn continued. "Or was I just supposed to sign whatever you put in front of me?" "Mom, it wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," she said softly. "You were going to wait until I paid off every cent of that mortgage, and then you were going to take it." Without so much as a conversation, Daniel didn't respond. Evelyn could hear his breathing, shallow, uneven. "I hope one day you understand how deeply that broke something in me," she whispered. "This isn't about the house. It's about trust." She ended the call before he could reply, and then, sitting in the quiet glow of the Paris night, Evelyn wept. She wept for the woman who had given everything and been treated as if she were nothing. She wept for the mother who had been taken for granted, for the years spent bending and shrinking herself to fit into other people's lives. But beneath the sorrow, something new stirred, the faint pulse of a life still waiting to be lived. By the time autumn brushed its golden fingertips across Paris, Evelyn felt like she was inhabiting a different version of herself. The woman who had stepped off the plane months earlier, fragile, angry, unsure, had softened into someone steadier, more grounded. Her days now unfolded with a gentle rhythm. Mornings spent sketching on a bench along the Seine. Afternoons in the atelier with paint-stained fingers and the hum of quiet concentration. Evenings wandering cobbled streets under the glow of street lamps. In one of her painting classes, the instructor, a silver-haired man named Laurent, spoke words that lingered with her. "A teacher's job is not to control the hand," he told the class as he walked between their easels. "It's to guide it, to show possibilities, not to dictate outcomes." Evelyn stared at the canvas in front of her, a half-finished landscape of the Luxembourg Gardens, and the phrase echoed through her mind. Guide, not control. She realized that had been her mistake with Daniel, and perhaps his with her. She had tried to shape his life too much, to fix every misstep before he could fall. And in doing so, she had made it easy for him to take her sacrifices for granted. He, in turn, had tried to define the limits of her place in his world, boxing her into a role that served as comfort rather than honoring her humanity. The thought didn't hurt the way it once had. It felt like clarity, a quiet truth settling into place. She couldn't rewrite the past, but she could choose how she lived the rest of her life. A few weeks later, her attorney called with news. Daniel had withdrawn his attempt to contest the house sale. "It's over," the lawyer said. "There's nothing pending now." Evelyn thanked him, and when the call ended, she stood by the open window of Kathleen's apartment, watching a cluster of yellow leaves spiral down into the street. The bitterness she'd once carried had faded into something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a willingness to move forward without being tethered to the pain. 2 days later, an email arrived from Patricia. The subject line read simply, "I'm sorry." The message was longer than Evelyn expected. Patricia admitted she had pushed for the cruise without Evelyn because she wanted space and believed it was time for their nuclear family to stand on its own. She confessed that she had often used Evelyn's willingness to help as a crutch, relying on her too much, taking her kindness as something owed rather than given. And she wrote that she regretted it deeply. "I can't undo what we did," the message read, "but I hope someday you'll allow us a chance to make it right." Evelyn read the email twice before replying. Her response was just 2 sentences. "Thank you for your honesty. I wish you and the children well." It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't a wall either. It left the door ajar, enough space for something new to emerge if, and only if they were willing to meet her as an equal rather than a convenience. That night, she walked home from class through a street lined with chestnut trees, their leaves glowing amber under the streetlights. Paris had begun to feel like home, not because of the city itself, but because of the person she was becoming here. She no longer woke up thinking of the past. She thought about colors, the deep ultramarine she used for the river, the ochre she mixed for autumn skies, the bright vermilion that seemed to breathe on canvas. Each stroke felt like a declaration. She was still here, still creating, still changing. And perhaps, Evelyn thought as she watched the lights shimmer on the Seine, there was hope not just for herself, but for her family too, if they were willing to change as well. The winter air in Paris carried a crispness that made everything feel sharper, more vivid. By late December, the city had transformed into a painting itself. Garlands of light draped over narrow streets, shop windows glowing with holiday warmth, the Seine glittering under a pale silver sky. Evelyn stood in the middle of a small gallery in the Marais district, staring at two canvases that bore her signature. It felt surreal. Months ago, she hadn't touched a paintbrush in decades. Now, two of her pieces, Rooftops at Dusk and Beneath the Chestnut Tree, hung on the gallery wall as part of a winter exhibition featuring emerging artists over 60. People paused to study them, murmuring softly, some leaning in closer to read her name on the little placards. Evelyn Carter. She was still taking it all in when a familiar voice broke through the hum of conversation. "Mom," she turned, and there he was. Daniel stood just inside the doorway, his hands shoved awkwardly into the pockets of his coat, his eyes darting nervously around the room before settling on her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "What are you doing here?" she asked finally, her voice steady but cautious. "I had to see you," he said. "Kathleen told me about the exhibition." Evelyn's heart gave a small, unsteady thud. She hadn't expected him, hadn't dared to imagine he would cross an ocean just to speak to her. "You came all this way?" Daniel nodded. "I needed to." They walked slowly through the gallery together, the silence heavy but not hostile. He stopped in front of Beneath the Chestnut Tree and stared at it for a long time. "This one," he said quietly, "it feels sad and hopeful at the same time." "That's because it is," Evelyn replied. "It's about endings and beginnings." Daniel swallowed hard, then turned to face her. "I didn't come here to ask you to come home," he said, his voice low. "I know I don't have the right to do that. I just needed to say something I should have said a long time ago." Evelyn waited, her pulse drumming softly in her ears. "I've spent my whole life thinking of you as Mom," he said. "Not Evelyn. Not a person with dreams or needs or limits. Just Mom. The one who shows up, fixes things, sacrifices. I never stopped to think about what that did to you. And I never thanked you for everything you gave up for me." His words landed gently but deeply, and Evelyn felt her eyes sting. "Daniel," she began, but he shook his head. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it," he said. "I just want you to know that I see it now. I see you now. And I'm trying, I really am trying to change." For a long time, Evelyn said nothing. Then she stepped closer and placed a trembling hand on his cheek. "I never needed you to be perfect," she whispered. I just needed you to see me." "I do," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "I see you now." Something shifted in that moment, not a dramatic reconciliation, not a sweeping fix to years of wounds, but the fragile beginning of one. They moved toward each other almost instinctively, and for the first time in many years, Evelyn wrapped her arms around her son. The hug was awkward at first, tentative, like two people relearning a language they had once spoken fluently. But then it deepened, warmed, and Evelyn felt the weight between them begin to dissolve, if only slightly. When they finally stepped apart, Daniel smiled, a small, hesitant smile, but real. "Your paintings are beautiful," he said. "You're beautiful, Mom." Evelyn laughed softly through the tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Thank you." As the crowd continued to flow through the gallery, they stood there side by side, not as a mother and son trapped in the past, but as two people cautiously building a new kind of relationship. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Christmas morning in Paris arrived wrapped in soft gray light and the faint sound of church bells drifting through the city. Evelyn woke to the smell of fresh croissants from the bakery downstairs and the chill of winter air sneaking in through the window panes. She brewed coffee, wrapped herself in a thick wool shawl, and set up her tablet on the small table by the window. It was time for the first Carter family Christmas call she had ever spent oceans away from them. When the screen lit up, Noah and Sophie's faces appeared first, pressed close together and grinning. "Grandma!" they shouted in unison. Evelyn's heart swelled. "Merry Christmas, my darlings. Look what we made." Sophie held up a lumpy gingerbread house decorated with too much frosting. "Dad helped." Daniel leaned into the frame, laughing. "She means I tried to help. They didn't let me do much." Victoria appeared next, her hair pulled back into a messy bun. No makeup, a worn sweatshirt replacing her usual polished look. "Merry Christmas, Evelyn," she said warmly. "We miss you." The conversation flowed easily, more naturally than it had in years. Noah showed off the new soccer ball he'd received. Sophie performed a short song she had learned at school. Daniel talked about how he had started coaching Noah's Little League team. And Victoria shared that she had scaled back her work hours to spend more time with the kids. "It's been good," Daniel admitted. "Different, but good. We're trying to focus on the important stuff, dinners together, walks in the park, reading before bed. Less rushing, less noise." Evelyn smiled, deeply and genuinely. "That sounds wonderful." "And you?" Victoria asked. "How's Paris treating you?" Evelyn glanced out the window, where snow was beginning to fall softly over the rooftops. "Paris has been everything I didn't know I needed," she said. "I walk every day. I paint. I sit by the river and think about nothing at all. For the first time, my days belong entirely to me." Sophie piped up. "When are you coming home, Grandma?" Evelyn hesitated. It was the question she had known would come, and the one she didn't yet have an answer to. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said honestly. "Maybe soon. Maybe not for a while. But I'm always here, just a call away." The children accepted this with the unquestioning resilience of youth. The adults understood the weight behind it. Evelyn wasn't running away. She was choosing herself, and the timing of her return would depend on when she was ready, not when others expected it. After they signed off, Evelyn sat quietly for a long moment, watching snowflakes melt against the glass. Kathleen entered the room carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. "How was the call?" she asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Good," Evelyn said softly. "Better than I expected." Kathleen studied her face and smiled. "Do you know what I see when I look at you now?" "What?" "A woman who has flourished," Kathleen said. "You could have let bitterness swallow you whole. Many people would have. But instead, you turned it into something else, into growth." Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from the truth in her sister's words. "It doesn't erase the past," she murmured. "No," Kathleen agreed, "but it makes the future brighter." Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the city in white. Evelyn lifted her cup and let the warmth seep into her hands. Christmas had always been about giving, but this year she had given herself something she had denied for too long: permission to bloom. By the time the new year rolled across Paris, Evelyn felt a shift stirring deep within her. The holiday lights faded from the boulevards, the winter markets closed, and the city settled into a quieter rhythm, one that mirrored the calm inside her. One evening in early January, she stood at the window of Kathleen's apartment, watching snow fall over the slate rooftops, and knew it was time. Paris had healed her, steadied her, shown her who she could be. Now, she wanted to bring that version of herself home. Her decision to return came with conditions, not demands, but promises she made to herself. She would not move back into Daniel's orbit as the ever-available mother who dropped everything at a moment's notice. She would live in her own apartment, maintain her independence, continue painting, and protect the boundaries she had fought so hard to build. She would choose when and how she engaged with her family, and on terms that respected her dignity. In February, she landed at Philadelphia International Airport with 2 suitcases and a heart lighter than it had been in decades. A week later, she moved into a sunlit apartment in Rittenhouse Square, its walls blank and waiting for her art. She found a local painting class at a community arts center, where she quickly fell in with a group of women her age who shared stories over coffee and painted late into the evenings. On weekends, she invited Noah and Sophie over for picnics at Fairmount Park or movie nights with popcorn and blankets on the floor. They painted together, 2 messy splashes of color that ended up more on the table than the canvas. Her life was no longer defined by sacrifice or obligation. It was shaped by choice. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel came by alone. They walked slowly through the park, snow crunching beneath their boots, talking about nothing and everything: the kids' new school projects, Victoria's attempts at cooking, Evelyn's latest painting class. At one point, Daniel stopped walking and turned to her. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you." "For what?" "For being strong enough to do what you did. It forced us to look at ourselves, at how we were living, at how we treated you. I don't think we would have changed otherwise." Evelyn looked at him for a long time before speaking. "Strength isn't loud, Daniel," she said softly. "Sometimes it's just saying no when you've spent your whole life saying yes." He nodded, emotion flickering across his face. Later that afternoon, Sophie, bright-eyed and curious, asked her grandmother a question that caught Evelyn off guard. "Grandma," she said, "did you forgive Daddy and Mommy?" Evelyn paused, then smiled gently. "Forgiveness isn't about saying what they did was okay," she explained. "It's about not letting that hurt control what comes next. I haven't forgotten, and I don't pretend it never happened. But I'm choosing to build something new instead of living in what's broken." Sophie nodded thoughtfully, as if she understood more than Evelyn expected. In late February, Evelyn's 63rd birthday arrived quietly, marked by dinner with friends and a homemade cake from Noah and Sophie. As the evening wound down, Daniel handed her a small envelope. Inside were 2 plane tickets to Florence, Italy, and a certificate for a 6-week painting course at an art school there. "It's not just a gift," he said. "It's a thank you for showing us how to start over." Tears blurred Evelyn's vision as she held the tickets. Florence, a city she had dreamed of visiting but never dared to. That night, as she stood by her apartment window watching the city lights shimmer across the Schuylkill River, Evelyn thought about the journey that had brought her here. It had begun with heartbreak and betrayal, with standing alone at a port while the people she loved sailed away without her. But that pain had sparked something fierce and necessary, the courage to reclaim her life. Revenge, she realized now, had only been the spark. Liberation was the victory.